And I'm going to say right now, perhaps my first controversial thing. If you are white, I'm sure you have an opinion on this topic, and I don't know you. I don't know anybody in this room, except for Edwin and Christos. And still I am confident to say the following. If you have not devoted years of sustained study, struggle, and focus on this topic, your opinions are necessarily narrow and superficial.
What's up, YouTube family? Welcome back to my space. This is Evans Raiola. So guys, kindly do consider subscribing to my channel for amazing Black stories in Africa and in the diaspora. So guys, on today's video, we want to talk about Dr. Robin DiAngelo, who spoke about the white fragility and explained why white people rarely want to talk about racism. Dr. Robin DiAngelo is a sociologist, educator, and author, best known for her work on racism and critical discourse on whiteness, particularly through her book, White Fragility: Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. The concept of white fragility refers to the defensive reactions that many white people have when their racial worldviews, positions, or advantages are challenged. DiAngelo argues that because white people in Western societies often grow up insulated from race-based stress, even minimal racial discomfort can trigger strong defensive responses like anger, fear, guilt, or dismissal. So guys, I want us to watch this video of Dr. Angelo talking about the issue of defense when it comes to racism by white folks. So let's watch this video. Once it's done, we'll get back and do a critical analysis of the same. Let's watch this, guys.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank Stanley for the honor of having a dialogue with you following the talk. I want to thank all the people who made this possible, and I especially want to thank Edwin Cleophas, who made this possible about a year ago. I got an email from somebody in South Africa who said, I want to bring you. And we began to email and we began to Skype and build a relationship, and a year later, he brought me. So thank you, Edwin. He's treating me very well, too. All right. I am going to start with a quote by, as we turn this on, by Ijeoma Oluo, who is local to Seattle where I live, because this quote helps frame the particular focus that I take in my work. And so she says, she's a young Black woman. I don't want you to understand me better. I want you to understand yourselves. Your survival has never depended on your knowledge of white culture. In fact, it's required your ignorance. And this quote is important to me because this is arguably the most complex, nuanced, charged, sensitive social dilemma of the last several hundred years in both our contexts. And disclaimer, we will not solve racism tonight. And I won't even be able to do justice to the complexity of racism. There are myriad roads into this deeply complex issue, and all of them are critical, but there's a particular road in that I see consistently left off the table or unaddressed. So when we come together to hear anything about racism, race relations, when we have professional development, when we take classes, we tend to study them. So we learn about this racial group or this racial group, their struggles, their triumphs, their heroes, their heroines, what we need to know when we're working with this group. How do we recruit more of this group or that group? But what we rarely ever ask is struggles in relation to whom? Triumphs in relation to whom or what? Who am I as I interact across this difference? So we rarely ever look at dominant culture or whiteness, right? And I would never ever propose that my voice is the only voice you should hear. You could never understand racism by only listening to a white voice. But it is a piece of the puzzle that's missing that is necessary. So let me position myself. I'm white. Check me out, everybody. And part of being white, and I make myself throw my hands out, Part of being white is that is an uncomfortable thing for me to do, to draw your attention to my race and to proceed as if it matters. I was not raised to see myself in racial terms. I understood that somebody had race, of course, but not really me. And if we're going to be talking about race, we'd be talking about their race, right? Not mine. I wasn't raised to see it as informative of anything about me. I am very clear today, however, after a good 20 plus years of day in and day out, study, struggle, research, mistake making, relationship building, and talking to countless people about race, I'm really clear I am white. I have a white frame of reference, I have a white worldview, and I move through the world with a white experience. And it is not just a universal human experience as I was taught to see it. It is most particularly a white experience in societies that are deeply separate and unequal by race. So while I'm always coming from this position and perspective, I want to be explicit about it tonight. And when I say we and us, I'm talking to the majority of the people in this room. And the majority of the people who, if they haven't always controlled the table, get to decide who controls the table. I'm talking to my fellow white people. So let me say a little bit about what I hope will be valuable about this approach for the people of color here tonight. Well, the first thing I hope that will be valuable for you is that in my short time with you, I'm going to name and admit to things that white people will rarely ever name or admit to. And if you've ever scratched your head wondering, how do they pull that off? Can they really not see this? And why so often so resistant to seeing this? I will help you with that. How we come to be both so oblivious and so resistant to challenging that obliviousness. I want to acknowledge, this will help with the gaslighting. Because we're always telling you that what's happening is not happening. It's happening. I want to acknowledge that a great deal of what I can articulate about what it means to be white rests on years and years and years of brilliant and patient mentorship from people of color, from those who have come before my time and whose works have informed me, and for those in my life who have chosen to be mentors, provide mentorship for me. People of color have been saying this for a very, very, very long time. Right? And unfortunately, one of the dynamics of implicit bias is if you are white, whether you are conscious of it or not, you are a little more likely to be open to being challenged on race by me than you would be if I was saying the exact same things and was not white. And this sets up what Audre Lorde beautifully called the master's tools dilemma. She said, how do you dismantle the master's house when you only have the master's tools? So I want to acknowledge that as I stand up here at this podium, granted credibility and authority to my voice, on race no less, like virtually every other person put in front of all of us granted authority and credibility, I am centering and reinforcing whiteness. Consciously or not, it is being reinforced for all of us in this room as I stand up here. Now this is a dilemma, trust me, I have tossed and turned about for a very long time. How I have reconciled it is to not use this platform to break with white solidarity, to not use this voice to challenge racism, for me is unacceptable. That would be to really be white, right? And I'd like to be a little less white. Now, what do I mean when I say I want to be a little less white? Trust me, I don't mean a little more Italian. I don't mean a little more Irish, right? As we say in the States. I don't mean a little more ethnic. For me, to be a little less white means to be a little less ignorant, a little less arrogant in my ignorance, a little less certain and complacent and apathetic about racial injustice, right? A little more humble and curious and vulnerable and open, right? Okay. Well, let's talk about some of the challenges of educating white people on racism. I'm going to give you a great example. I was recently asked to do some work for a large tech company Google, actually. And before they would sign the contract, the legal department wanted to see my slides. And I was pretty sure if the legal department looks at my slides, I'm not getting the contract. But they came back to me and they only had issue with one slide, this one. And they actually said, could you take the word white off the slide? So just hold that for a minute. Let's not name that. Let's not proceed if that has meaning. As some have put it, white fragility shuts down conversation on white fragility. All right, my reply, of course, was, you really should have vetted me before you called. No, I won't take the word white off the slide. All right, so the first challenge is that I have never met a white person who didn't have an opinion on racism, have you? If you're not sure all white people have opinions on racism, just bring it up next time you're around a bunch of white people, maybe tonight when you have dinner. And watch, right? Couple things are going to happen. Void of silence or the same trite responses are going to be rehearsed, right? Push even further and you're going to get emotional upset. And I'm going to say right now, perhaps my first controversial thing. If you are white, I'm sure you have an opinion on this topic and I don't know you. I don't know anybody in this room, except for Edwin and Christos. And still I am confident to say the following. If you have not devoted years of sustained study, struggle, and focus on this topic, your opinions are necessarily narrow and superficial. Wow, how can I say that about you when I don't know you? Maybe you volunteered in, I don't know, when in the US we say volunteered in Africa, so I don't know what you would say here. Or, you know, I build houses for the poor type of thing. All right. I can say it because nothing in dominant culture gives us the information we would need to have an informed opinion on this topic. You can get through graduate school in this country without ever discussing systemic racism, can you not? Yes. Okay. You can get through law school in this country without discussing systemic racism, and I'm pretty sure you can get through teacher education. Right? Right? So, in fact, you have to make effort. You almost have to have courage to have an informed understanding as a white person on this topic because there's so much pressure not to speak of it. So the first challenge for those of us who are white is humility. Humility, humility. No one in this room knows all they need to know. Nobody's learning is finished, including mine. Right? Second challenge is that if I do a good job, this is not going to be a comfortable talk for the white people. The status quo of this society and the society that I live in is racism. It is not an aberration. It is 24/7, 365. It is the norm. And I move through both these societies in racial comfort. I move through a racist society in racial comfort. So we are not going to get where we need to go from a place of white comfort. We need to unsettle that and build our capacity to endure it. The key is going to be what you do with those moments if I manage to stimulate them for you. And you can use them as a way out. And many white people do use racial discomfort as a way out, right? She did it wrong, or I would have not been uncomfortable. You can also use it as a relatively rare way in. Why does this feel threatening? Or why does this make me angry? Or why are my arms starting to cross and my breathing starting to pick up? What can this help me see about the framework of meaning I'm coming from that would cause me to respond this way? And there are two places where white people begin to get uncomfortable when I give a talk, whether you can consciously articulate it to yourself or not. And the first one is how often I'm going to say the word white. So heads up, about 100 times, right? We're not used to being seen racially. We're not used to having that named and having people proceed as if it has meaning. The second place that discomfort begins is that I'm going to challenge a very precious ideology in Western-oriented white settler colonial societies, and that is the precious ideology of individualism. I'm going to generalize about white people for about 90 minutes, and you're all going to be just fine. Yes, you are unique individuals, and even if I wanted to, I couldn't possibly hold all your stories. You are also members of a social group. By virtue of this membership in this group, we could literally predict whether you and your mother were going to survive your birth. It has profound meaning to be a member of this racial group. We are swimming in the same water, we are receiving the same messages, we are being collectively socialized. We have to be willing to set aside our sense of how special and different we are and grapple with the shared experience. And the way this is going to come up is invariably, I'm going to say something, and if you are white, you're going to think, oh, no, I'm an exception, which of course will show me that you are not, right? There really isn't anything that you could say to me that would actually establish for me that you're an exception, right? Nothing could and nothing did. This isn't a point I'm going to try to make all evening. Nothing could and nothing did exempt any white person in this room from the forces of systemic racism. And it's on us to figure out how they shaped our lives, not if. So that thing that you think makes you different, ask yourself, how did that set me up into the racist structure I live in? I swim in, I was born into. It set me up differently than my friend over here got set up, but we were both set up. For example, I grew up in poverty. I learned my place in the racial hierarchy from a different class position than a white middle-class girl learned hers, but I learned it. And trust me, poverty doesn't negate racial privilege or advantage, and it absolutely helped me overcome poverty. All right, finally, we don't tend to understand the systemic dimensions of racism. So we use these terms interchangeably: bias, prejudice, racism. And I need to be really clear, they are not the same, and I don't use them interchangeably, right? Well, let's see, what slide's coming next? All right, let me say, all people have bias. In this case, racial. All people have racial bias. My friend Edwin could be on face meeting me, dismiss me because I'm white, and snub me. And that wouldn't be nice. That would be bias or prejudice and discrimination, right? He can do that, and I can do that. But when you back my group's bias with power, it is transformed, right? And we have to reserve language for that difference. And I want to give you an example. It's the best example I have found. So women were granted suffrage or the right to vote in South Africa in 1918. Right? And hang in there, because I'm going to keep making this more complex. But right now, the way your textbooks probably tell you is women were granted the right to vote in 1918. In the US, women were granted the right to vote in 1920. There was only one possible way that women could be granted their civil rights, in this case, suffrage, and that was for men to grant it to us. We could not grant it to ourselves. We couldn't even vote on our right to vote. We couldn't even advocate in certain public forums for our right to vote. Only men could grant that for us, right? And notice that every institution worked together to make that take decades and decades of struggle. It wasn't just up to whatever you call your Congress, right? The clergy preached from the pulpit, it's God's will that women not vote. Now try coming up against God's will. And the men who speak for him, right? I was raised Catholic. I don't think I would have been a suffragette in 1918 because I don't think I could have overcome that conditioning. You never question the authority of priests. In my case, I was raised Catholic. So now you've implanted in the mind of the oppressed.
So family, here are some of the key points that we'll discuss on matters white fragility. Number one is racial stress. D'Angelo explains that white people experience low levels of racial stress because of the social and systematic advantages associated with being white. As a result, they may not develop resilience to conversations about race, which can lead to fragility when their views are challenged. Many a times the white people do not have any racial stress. They are always on a better side when it comes to issues in concerning race. So many a times when they tend to be challenged about any issues of race, they tend to develop this anger. There are a lot of dismissal, there is a lot of guilt, and a lot of anger. And they'll always find something to answer you, because many a times they are not used to be having any racial stressors because they are privileged in the society. Black folks have always been taken as people who are inferior, while white as superior. So they do not know, or rather they've never experienced any racial stressors. So the second point that we look up to when we talk about the white fragility is the common defensive responses. When faced with conversations about racism, common responses from white people may include denial, emotional withdrawal, argumentation, or accusations of reverse racism. These reactions hinder productive dialogue and learning. We've seen these many a times. I've seen conversations where white people are asking black folks, so if you say Black Lives Matter, what do you mean? Do you mean that white lives do not matter? That already is reverse. How do I put it? That already is reverse racism. They're trying to act like they are the people who are affected with this issue, and in real sense, the main person who's going through the inferiority, the main person who's going through discrimination is the black folk, and the black folk, as he's trying to raise his voice and try to say and articulate themselves about the atrocities that they are being caused, white folks come and say, no, our lives also matter. Our voice must also be heard. That's why the second point is so important when we talk about white fragility. They have common defensive responses, just like such as denial. They deny and say, no. We're also affected. There is the emotional withdrawal, argumentation. They may easily lose temper, and reverse racism, just like I've explained. Then the third theme that we'd like to look at is systemic racism. D'Angelo emphasizes that racism is not just a matter of individual prejudice, but is deeply embedded in systems and institutions, benefiting white people at the expense of others. She urges that white people to understand their role in perpetuating these systems, even unintentionally. It's so systemic. There are systems that have been made to make it just difficult for black folks. Systems and institutions, benefiting white people at the expense of others. They do not care. For as long as their interests are looked upon, every other thing is okay. That's how they do the systemic racism. Then number 4, on the other point, on the key points to look at is the call for action. D'Angelo encourages white people to engage in self-reflection and develop a deeper awareness of their racial identity and privilege. She advocates for sustained effort to address internalized racism and actively work towards racial justice. That's the solution that now D'Angelo is bringing on board, which is encouraging white people to engage in self-reflection and develop a deeper awareness of their racial identity and privilege. They should know that they're actually privileged. They should know that black folks have been going through discrimination. Black folks went through slavery, and right now they are going through systemic racism in the expense of white folks. You know, it's high time that they do a self-reflection and they get to understand the atrocities caused to black folks and why they shouldn't feel as if they are victims anytime people try and talk about matters racism. You know, the main goal for this topic of white fragility is that white folks do not want to be engaged in topics of matters racism. You know, they feel offended, they feel like you're doing something wrong to them. You know, they'd want to reverse the same thing. They're not ready to discuss about these issues. It's high time that they do a self reflection. According to D'Angelo, she's trying to call for action. She's trying to explain to white folks that white fragility is wrong. It's time that forums are made and they are able to talk about issues that are affecting black folks when it comes to matters racism. She's trying to push for racism to be a topic of discussion amongst white and black folks in the US. White supremacists many a times do not want to talk about these issues, and the main goal for this video is to try and foster and get rid of white fragility and ensure that this topic is a topic that can be easily discussed. D'Angelo's works has sparked widespread conversation and debate, with some praising her insights into how white people can become more aware of racism, while others critique her approach for being overly simplistic or for centering the conversation around the white people's feelings. So guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Kindly do consider subscribing to my channel for amazing stories from the Americas. And guys, I do not take the support so far for granted. Kindly like this video so that it can be recommended to your friends and family. And guys, lastly, I'd highly request you guys to comment down below so that we may be able to learn together. Thank you guys, and see you all in my next video. Goodbye.